Hello, divine creations, divine marvels, children of God. Thank you so much for dropping by this video. I just can't help smiling. I'm broadcasting in a new room of my house, and I just feel very excited to be doing so. And so, even though I'm in a new room, and even though it's a new day, what comes to me is that this path, the path that Bruno Gröning taught us, which for anyone who's new, Bruno Gröning was a very simple, humble man who was active in post-World War II Germany. And in his presence, the unbelievable happened. Blind people regained their vision. Paralyzed people stood up out of their wheelchair. Blind people literally were able to see again through the spiritual work that Bruno Gröning did. And this happened tens of thousands of times. And besides healing, he also taught. And he said that what he was teaching was simply the teachings of Jesus Christ. So he expressed what Christ taught in the most simple, straightforward, direct language I've ever encountered. I consider him the greatest Christian of all time, the most Christ-like being that I've ever heard of. And so one of the things he pointed out, which most people on a spiritual or religious path know, but maybe, I kind of knew this, the teaching I'm about to share, but I didn't take it fully to heart. But what he, in essence, expressed is that we need God. If we want to be happy, healthy, and harmonious, if we want to have a good life, Bruno Gröning was adamant that the only real way for that to happen was to seek out God. He said it very simply. He said, only God can help us. And here he means help in a really deep sense of the word, in the sense of really freeing ourselves from any problems. Now, as human beings, most human beings I bump into, is we spend our time trying to solve problems. For example, let's say there's an unhealthy relationship. So you end that relationship and you go to another one. Or let's say you don't like the place that you live. So you look for a new place and you pack up your stuff and you move and you go to a new house. All these things are good. If a relationship isn't healthy, then it needs to be left. If a house where you're living doesn't feel right, isn't supportive, then you need to leave. And I want to ask a question, a question that sounds kind of ridiculous. But in those two examples of leaving a relationship that's just not healthy, or finding a house or a place to live that's better suited to you, have you or I, because I do it too, in those circumstances, let's say a person who does that, have they actually solved their problem? Now, they have solved their human problem, in this case, an unhealthy relationship, a place where they lived that wasn't good, or wasn't fully suited to them. But they haven't solved their spiritual problem, according to the teachings of Bruno Gröning, which again, I consider just to be the most clear expression of the teachings of Christ. Now, before I go any further, I'm not advising anyone to stay in an unhealthy relationship, or I'm not saying it's bad to move. What I am saying, and what Bruno Gröning called us to the recognition of, just like Christ, is to recognize what our actual problem is, what our fundamental problem, challenge, what the fundamental block to a good life, to a happy life, to health and happiness. It's not the unhealthy relationship. It's not living in a place that's not exactly what we want. Our fundamental block to what's good, to a good life, is this very, very subtle yet very powerful thing, which Bruno Gröning point blank called evil. He didn't call it exactly evil, though, because he didn't speak English. He spoke German. And so in German, the word is Bosse, which not only means evil, it also means nasty and vicious. Bruno Gröning was adamant that there is a being, a force, a consciousness that is literally constantly seeking to drag us down, to pull us off course, to literally have us be unhealthy, unhappy, and be miserable. And he point blank called it evil, and he point blank called it the devil. Now, some people don't resonate with the idea of evil or devil, and I didn't when I found this path, and now I very clearly do because I've come to understand what Bruno Gröning was referring to. He wasn't referring to evil in the human sense of the word. He was referring to a force, again, a force, a consciousness that literally has one goal: the destruction of everything that's good, the destruction of someone's peace of mind, the destruction of someone's health, the destruction of an individual's life. But it goes bigger than that. According to Bruno Gröning, evil literally is trying to destroy this earth. Now, Bruno Gröning was adamant that evil will not succeed at that, but that can give you a sense of the nastiness and the viciousness of this thing called evil. How does it operate? Well, according to Bruno Gröning, and he's not the first person to point this out, in essence, there are two kinds of thoughts. There are thoughts that are healthy, true, and helpful, and there are thoughts that are destructive, stressful, and untrue. And evil is continuously sending thoughts to us to drag us down. There, people sort of, this idea is sometimes made fun of, where you'll see cartoons where there's a person when on one shoulder there's an angel and on another shoulder there's a devil, and each voice is trying to get the person's attention. While this is often depicted as sort of silly or medieval or old-fashioned, any person who spends any amount of time observing themselves and observing their body will see that this is actually, if not literally true, metaphorically true. That thought by thought, our thoughts are either leading us in a direction of wellness, or they're leading us in the direction of unwellness. So to anyone who says, "Oh, that's silly," what I invite you to do is to sit and watch your thoughts for 20 minutes and then come back and tell me if you think it's silly. Because what I've learned from watching my thoughts is all day long, there are thoughts happening. And some of those thoughts are inspired and healthy and helpful, and some of those thoughts are straight up destructive. But don't take my word for it. Don't take Bruno Gröning's word for it. Find out for yourself. Spend a little time observing your mind, and then also observing the impact of each thought. With every thought that comes, there generally is an emotional response and generally an action. Thoughts, according to Bruno Gröning, thoughts move, push, cajole, persuade us to take certain actions. And so which thoughts we take in, which thoughts we say yes to, not only have a profound impact on our emotional state, but have a profound impact on our actions. And what is a life but a series of actions? So, one of the other things that Bruno Grinning called us to, which I believe to be, again, the exact same thing Christ called us to, was to take in, to fill ourselves up with divine life energy. So, to do this, the first prerequisite is to be open to such a thing even exists. And then he taught a very simple practice of how to take it in. Please sit with your legs uncrossed, feet flat on the floor, hands on your legs, palms facing upwards, back in an upright position, not stiff, but not slouched either. And then please close your eyes. And now hand over all worries, all fears. And also separate yourself mentally from any illness, any physical challenge you're up against. Please separate yourself from the idea of illness. And then begin to think about healing. Focus your entire attention on your healing. And then ask. Ask to receive this divine healing energy and observe your body. Noticing what you feel, having the intention to take this energy in, and then trusting that every sensation is a step towards your healing. Taking in this healing life energy, recognizing that every sensation is a step towards your recovery. noticing what you feel, intending to absorb, take in this energy. So I'm going to do a little talking and reading, and you're welcome to sit with your eyes closed and continue to take this energy in. And so, this idea of thoughts and the recognition of how powerful thoughts are. Bruno Gröning very simply said thoughts are forces, forces of which humankind are barely aware, which I take to mean barely understand how powerful they are. I'm reminded of I'm reminded of something called cognitive therapy, one of the research-wise considered to be one of the most effective forms of counseling, just based on scientific research. And the essence of it is to identify thoughts, especially stressful thoughts, and to notice their impact on you. And this is a very, very important um, thing for all of us to do, is to notice that every thought has an effect. Um, in post World War II Germany, when Bruno was teaching and doing this healing work, there was a slogan going around: thoughts are tax free, meaning that you can just the conditions were difficult there, and so the joke kind of was, well, at least I can have my thoughts for free. But Bruno Gröning was very critical of this joke and this idea, because every thought comes with an effect. A negative thought, of course, is harmful and has quite the cost, and a positive thought has a benefit. So Bruno Gröning very vigorously said, and this is, I believe, an exact quote, I don't have my book handy, you must master your thoughts. So we all kind of know this to some extent. We all have this awareness that negative thinking is really harmful, and that it's very important to have a positive attitude. And Bruno Gröning took it a step further, saying that we just absolutely must learn to master our thinking. And the way he prescribed to do that was to reflect on each thought, whether it was a good thought or an ungood thought, a helpful or a harmful thought, and just discard the ones that weren't, and then ask for a good thought in its place. Now, that's a big undertaking to become mindful of and aware of all of our thinking and to monitor it all day long. Where to begin? Well, we can begin in periods of just closed eyed, what we were doing, tuning in or meditation, and really reflecting on each thought as it arises. Is this a good thought? Is this an ungood thought? One I like to do is, how does this thought feel? Because we're in the habit of just thoughts just appear in our mind and just saying yes to them. But Bruno Gröning pointed out this is very harmful, that we need to learn to discern because not every thought that we become aware of is helpful. There's a bumper sticker that jokes and says, "Don't believe everything you think." That joke is actually a very profound spiritual instruction. Just because we have a thought doesn't mean it's true. And just because we have a thought doesn't mean that it's helpful. So let's spend a little time in silence now and look at each thought and recognize and begin the practice or deepen the practice, hopefully, deepen the practice. Is this a healthy or an unhealthy thought? Is this a helpful, unhelpful, true, or untrue thought? I'll just give an example. Right as I closed my eyes, the thought came, "Oh, the people who are listening aren't liking what I'm saying." Okay, good. There we have case in point. Not a true thought. I don't know what each person here is thinking or feeling, and I don't know what each person who watches the recording of this is going to be. And it's also, so it's untrue and it's stressful. If I said yes to that thought, then I would feel fear and anxiety. And so, right there with one thought, you can see that every thought has an effect, and hence the need to be mindful. So, let's spend a little time discerning true and untrue thoughts, helpful, unhelpful. Observing our bodies, being mindful of our thoughts. So the thing is, what Bruno Grüning asks of us and what he pointed out is necessary for becoming a master of life. It's not easy to master our thoughts, much less to become a master of life. These are not easy undertakings by any means. And so this leads to what I consider to be really the absolute essence of what Jesus Christ taught and what Bruno Grüning reminded us of. That while it's absolutely essential for us to strive on the spiritual path, it's also, and maybe even more so, maybe they're equal, I don't know, absolutely necessary to recognize our need for God and our need for help on the life path, in life, on the spiritual path. Absolute need of help, whether you call it God or a higher power, a spiritual helper or spiritual savior, whatever you call this spiritual thing that's larger than us. Bruno Grüning pointed out over and over and over again the recognition of our need for help. He pointed out the recognition of our need to strive for the good, and simultaneously the need for us to reach out to a power greater than ourselves. He himself said, if you adopt the thought or the attitude, I want to be healthy, he said, then ask God for help. A human being is too weak on their own. Now, this can sound discouraging. This can sound disempowering, but it's only disempowering if it's not true. If it is true that we're up against a force that's bigger than us, then if we keep trying to defeat or overcome something that's bigger than us, then basically what we're doing is we're continuing to fight a battle we can't win. So it's very important for anyone on this path, and really anyone in life, to ask themselves, can I succeed at life without God, without a higher power? More specifically on this path, can I overcome evil on my own? It's a make or break question. It's a deep, deep attitude, because if we think we can, then we're not going to seek out a higher power. We're not going to seek out God with the fervor that we will if we believe, if we recognize, if we become convinced that we can't free ourselves from evil on our own. When that recognition comes, then there's a deep seeking out of God and just a very different attitude towards life. It creates a sense of humility and a sense of constantly seeking God. So we need to recognize the problem, and there are different spiritual words for the fundamental problem: evil, ego, delusion, illusion, detachment, attachment. And then to ask ourselves, on my own, can I rise above and overcome this it, whatever you want to call it? Again, evil, ego, illusion, delusion, attachment, the devil. First we need to identify it. Then we need to ask ourselves, can I overcome it on my own? If so, then go make your own efforts on your own. If not, then that takes us to a place of humility and a place of recognizing our need for God. So let's take a little time and reflect on this. What's the problem, meaning the fundamental problem or challenge of life? And then asking, once the problem feels identified, then asking, am I stronger than it? meaning, can I overcome it on my own? Noticing what you feel, every sensation, your body readjusting. So, I'm going to read a quote from the book called the Philokalia. It's a mystical text from the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition. And it says, if God sees that the intellect has entirely submitted to him and puts its hope in him alone, that's the attitude that of submitting to God and recognizing that our only hope is the divine. Now, of course, that could be a little confusing. What does it mean, only hope? Well, again, only hope for a life of happiness, health, and harmony, but also our only hope for salvation. Now, the word salvation is normally only discussed in spiritual, in a religious context. You hear people talk of being saved and so forth and so on. But it's very rarely talked about in a spiritual context. And just to differentiate, everyone of every religion is welcome here. And this is a spiritual talk, meaning a talk on universal values, principles, spiritual principles. And so, what is salvation from a spiritual perspective? without attached to a specific religion or a specific dogma. My understanding of what Bruno Gröning meant by salvation, and he used the German word Heil, which anyone who's very interested in Bruno Gröning's work, I would invite you to look at the word Heil. It's a fascinating German word, one of its meanings being salvation. But what I understand him to have meant by Heil, salvation, was a freedom from all problems and a state of being in which evil could no longer grasp the soul of an individual. So the question is, can we achieve that on our own? My personal answer is absolutely not. I cannot. I tried. I tried living as a monk. I tried many, many things. And so this attitude that this book, the Philokalia, calls people to, again, if God sees that the intellect has entirely submitted to him, and they mean intellect in a slightly different meaning, but I'll leave that aside for now. But if God sees that the intellect has entirely submitted to him and puts its hope in him alone, that's the attitude that for this path that Bruno Gröning called us to, and I'm utterly convinced that Christ called us to, this path of absolute reliance on God. And interestingly enough, it said intellect, and in this tradition, intellect is considered to be a part of in their use of the word, is actually considered to be a part of the soul. So this isn't just an idea, it's from deep within us. It's in this tradition, it's the part of the soul that can determine what's true. So when a deep part of us can recognize, oh my, I need God, that's when this attitude can come about, and it's a completely different way of approaching life. It's like who's in the driver's seat in your car, my car of life? Am I doing the driving, or am I trying to get out of the way and let the divine guide me and guide my life? So let's reflect on that for a moment. You know, Bruno Gröning likened us to a satellite dish or an antenna. That's literally part of the nature of the soul. And the question is, which transmission are we receiving? And the question is, can we live life well without the divine signal, the divine transmission? Bruno Gröning's answer is very clear on this subject. Absolutely not. But each of us has to come to our own recognition of this. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining in. Thanks for saying hi, Magdalena. Hello, Jisoo. Hi, Gerald. Hi, Forever Loving Everything. Thanks for saying hello. Thanks for joining in. And welcome to the other viewers and people who watch this recording. So I'm going to close us with a prayer. Beloved Maker, God, our dear friend Bruno, and beloved Christ, please help us to recognize our need for God and our need for nature. Please help us to be humble and recognize those needs. Please help us to deepen our faith in the divine, in its almighty power to help and heal and to completely free us from everything not good. From that place of humility and with that place of faith, help us to turn to God and literally submit, surrender, offer our will and our life. Please bring to awareness everything that blocks us from the divine connection, and please help us be willing to surrender it. And please, we humbly ask now, please remove from us everything that stands in the way of being connected to God, of being in service to God, of walking the good path. Having decided to walk the good path, please help us stay connected to the divine, and please help us to seek that out. And please help us to, again, to stay humble and to seek the divine guidance. From that place of connection and seeking guidance, please help us begin to clean up our past, to make right any wrongs we've done. And please help us to stay present and aware of any habits that we become aware of that block us from the divine connection, and to be mindful of our thoughts, which thoughts are true and helpful, which thoughts block us off from God, shut us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. And when those arise, to firmly say no to them and ask to receive a good thought. Please help us to reflect on every aspect of our life, every thought, every word, every deed, and to recognize which ones are in harmony with God and which ones aren't. And at the end of every day, to review our day and to same thing, recognize thought, word, and deed, which ones were good, which ones were not good. And when we become aware of a habit or aware of an action that wasn't good, to firmly resolve to do better. So let us please help us dedicate our lives to connection to God, with God, and to being guided. And from that place to be of service, to seek our own salvation, liberation from all evil, and to help others in that ultimate goal, liberation from everything not good, and to be one with, to be in union and communion with God. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. We'll be doing this again real soon. Take care. Much love.